Alright guys, so this one gets to me, and it's quite heavy. You might think it's weird, but it's just one of those cases that on paper looks pretty straightforward. And if you're into Marvel supervillains, it might. But here we go. There are just two men side by side on a quiet hill in Brazil. No blood or struggle. Just two guys lying peacefully in the grass, enjoying the view. Unfortunately, they're dead and wearing handmade lead masks over their face because, of course, they were. So, these weren't like real lead masks, these weren't Harley Quinn. This is something you'd make if you plan to look at a nuclear explosion or intending to be around something radioactive. But guys, before we get into that, if this kind of real world weirdness is your thing, do me a favor and hit the subscribe button real quick. So I know you guys want more of these oddities, and yeah, we'll get right back to the story. So let's get a little weirder. Next to these guys was a small notepad that had one thing written on it. It said clearly, at 1630, ingest capsules. After effect, protect metals, then wait for signal. That's it. And from the moment investigators read that line, this case has basically been a bottomless pit of contradictions, dead ends, and the theories all sound plausible until you actually look at the evidence or the lack thereof. This is an unfortunate case of curiosity and not something that the police here took very seriously. So let's take you back. We're in August 20th of 1966 on Ventum Hill near Niterói in Brazil. A young boy and his family had plans to picnic at the hill, which is pretty normal for them to do on the days when his parents weren't working. He loved to fly his kite and take on the sights, so he gets to the hill, sets up, and lets his kite soar. But this time, things are a little different though. He's running around and he's going through the brush and he stumbles over what he thought was a stick, comes to find out it's a leg. Looking down, he screams and runs to his parents, who at first glance don't think anything of it until they come around the bush and they find two men lying perfectly still. Of course, police respond to this immediately, thinking it's a crime scene. But from the moment they arrive, nothing lines up with foul play. The ground around the bodies isn't disturbed and there are no signs of a fight or drag marks. The men are neatly positioned on their backs. They have these raincoats buttoned up over three-piece suits, which would be perfect for a Men in Black case, but then we get to the goggles, which is even more or less weird because they weren't fully covering their face, just lead strips really over their eyes. Their wallets were also still in their pockets. They had cash and jewelry on them that wasn't touched. Now they did have a receipt for water bottles in their pockets, and of course they had the notebook that we talked about earlier, but nothing else was really out of place. The scene itself was incredibly clean, with no signs of a struggle, which makes us believe it could have been drugs or suicide, of course, but there are other factors that make how clean everything was just a bit more weird. So these two men were Miguel Jose Viana and Manuel Pereira de Cruz. Both were electronics technicians from Campos dos Goitacazes. These guys weren't the criminal types that we know of. They were well-known tinkerers around the block and radio nerds. The kind of guys who built homemade circuits, electronic testers, antennas, that kind of thing. More of a hobby engineer who took their experience way more seriously than most did, and unfortunately weren't really taken seriously by the community. But they did have friends, and their friends described them as being curious and eccentric, if not a little earnest. They believed radio waves and electromagnetic fields could reveal energies or signals the human eye couldn't quite detect. And that detail stands out because of the masks and the notebook. Well, it all ties back to their fascination with these invisible forces, but not quite in the way you're probably imagining it at this point. So on August 17th, this is 3 days before the bodies were found, they left home telling their families that they were going to Sao Paulo to buy electronics equipment. Except they never went to Paulo. First, they withdrew a big chunk of cash. They bought 2 raincoats and lead sheets that we know they would have used to make the masks later with tools they probably already had. The last thing they bought was a notepad. The shopkeepers said that they were looking nervous, as though they were like kind of checking off a checklist and they just needed to get out of the store. Then the men hit their bus, but they went towards Niterói instead. Now already the story is slipping neatly out of its little box. When they get off the bus, they buy water from a local bar. The bartender says they were tense, focused, and always checking the time, just like the shopkeeper. And Miguel just kept looking at his watch as if he was waiting for something specific to happen either at that bar or locally. They both refused food and they left quickly, we suspect walking towards the hill. This was unfortunately the last time that anyone had saw them alive. Now here's the part that makes investigators lose their minds. This notebook. Inside was the line, at 1630, be at location, ingest capsules, and after effect, protect metals and wait for a signal. This is the first moment for me where I went, okay, these guys are a little nuts and they overdosed, right? This feels like the right answer here. But here's where the case twists, and it could just be exaggeration, but to this day, no poison or drug has ever been identified. Toxicology wasn't done until the bodies were decomposing. We'll get on that in a second. But the coroner still found there was no true internal organ damage, clotting, or any indications that there was some kind of toxin or failure that happened in their system. If they took something fatal, there should have been some other proof besides just toxicology. And there wasn't. And the capsules that they mentioned, they didn't seem to be in their system either, so we're not quite sure if they were legitimate or not. All we have really to run on is that line from the notebook. So a lot of theories cover this case. The main one is like the experiment theory, because the men worked so hard on electronics, and our first major theory was that they were conducting some kind of scientific experiment. So people suggest that they just bought the lead because they were expecting a bright flash from homemade devices and that was the easiest. And maybe the pills were part of the test. We're not quite sure. And if they were expecting some type of electromagnetic surge, there should be proof, right? The thing is that if they brought a device or anything really to test on the hill, where is it? Investigators combed the entire area and found no equipment or signs of anything that was remotely connected to them besides the book. And the masks weren't really safety gear. They were like these hand-cut pieces of lead sheets. They didn't have any padding on them, frames. They wouldn't secure to your face, right? They were barely held together at all. So if they were planning something technical, this setup is absurdly unprepared. So if the electromagnetic experiment gone wrong theory is wrong, it's probably because it's too neat. It collapses under all the details that we currently have. Now, the other main theory is ritualism. This is the part that gets dramatized most online, but honestly, I think it's the weakest theory. So the main reason is that in the 1960s, Brazil had the huge spiritualist movement where we had a lot of mediums and seances, psychic experiments, UFO clubs, that kind of thing. And Miguel and Manuel had attended a couple meetings, so investigators initially jumped to try to connect that kind of thought process, that they were trying to contact spirits or extraterrestrial intelligence, really trying to just point it to anything supernatural. And although this sounds great for media and makes our boys look a little too cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, which although is cinematic and fun, this unfortunately is a real case and there's no sign of anything that would show them being hardcore enthusiasts in this direction at all. Now the part that really gets under my feathers is, there was actually a third man and he's not really talked about enough. He claims to be a friend and a fellow technician whose name was never publicly released, and he claims to have told investigators that all three of them had been experimenting with high-intensity electronic devices that supposedly tapped into these unknown energies. He also said the masks were specifically for protecting their eyes from a powerful burst of light. And then he goes on to say something that's even more unsettling, is that he didn't go with them that evening because he thought the plan was too dangerous. So if he backed out from what we assumed was a harmless experiment, why was the third guy so scared? Why was he so worried about physical danger? And if it was a suicide attempt, why is there even a third man in the equation at all? This is where the case kind of starts to feel a little bit more real and intentional. Somebody quite obviously knew the risk, knew it existed, and then chose to walk away, and had yet to tell us anything additional about what actually happened that afternoon, which really grinds my gears and makes me question the legitimacy of this said person in the first place. Unfortunately, the part that makes this mystery unsolvable is that the Brazilian police simply did not investigate it properly. The case actually documents how bad of a job they did, better than the actual job they did. They let these guys' bodies sit in the morgue without refrigeration for days. So much so that by the time they attempted toxicology, it was pointless. They claim the hill was searched, but we literally have evidence that was written down, found, but then was lost within a few days or forgotten on the hill. So to put it frankly, evidence went missing, witness statements contradicted each other, and were never clarified by the police. Multiple items were seen at the scene that disappeared between reports. One officer later admitted the case was treated more like a curiosity than a homicide, which to me is disgusting and should truly be investigated in its own right. So by the time real detectives tried picking up this case, everything that could have answered the core question about the device, the capsules, and the cause of death was gone. So in my opinion, the most grounded but genuinely creepy explanation is that Miguel and Manuel weren't performing a ritual and they weren't trying to talk to aliens. What happened was they likely believed they were running a harmless scientific or metaphysical experiment that involved swallowing something, wearing protective masks, and waiting for a signal of some type, either it be visual or electromagnetic. So they underestimated the risk. If they ingested something experimentally, like a homemade capsule that had some type of chemical reaction that they didn't quite understand, it could have caused cardiac arrest or respiratory collapse. But because the forensic evidence is lost forever, we'll never really know. I truly don't think the masks were symbolic of an occult, and I think they were practical in their own minds. They were just trying to protect themselves the best way they could, and I think whatever they expected to see never happened. Their bodies simply shut down. Two men waiting for a signal that never came. So now it's been nearly 60 years and we still have no cause of death, no capsules found, and one man who could have explained it all walked away and never spoke publicly again. Two men are lying peacefully on a hill, lead masks on their face, a note of instructions, and a plan that made sense only to them. Whatever they believed they were about to witness, it unfortunately cost them their lives. So what do you guys think happened there on Ventum Hill? Drop your theory below and subscribe for more real-world oddities. As always, if you guys made it this far, drop "made it" in the comments, and I truly appreciate all the support. See you at the next one. Thanks, guys.